The arrogant millionaire musician laughed at the simple 8-year-old girl on stage and challenged her to a trumpet duel. "If you beat me, I'll pay for your music school." But when she started playing, the entire audience fell into absolute silence, and what happened next shocked everyone. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The spotlight burned hot on the stage of Nashville's Grand Theatre that humid August evening. 8-year-old Lily Cooper stood barefoot in a dress 2 sizes too big, clutching a battered trumpet that looked like it had survived a war. The metal was tarnished, dented in 3 places, and held together with duct tape around the valves. Marcus Sterling lounged in the judge's chair like a king on his throne, his platinum records and Grammy awards practically glowing in the stage lights. At 27, he was country music's golden boy, handsome, talented, and knew it. His custom-made trumpet, worth more than most people's cars, rested casually across his lap. "Well, well," Marcus drawled into his microphone, his voice dripping with amusement. "What do we have here? Honey, did you pull that thing out of a dumpster?" The audience laughed. Lily's small hands tightened around her trumpet. "Yes, sir," she said quietly, her voice barely reaching the microphone. "I found it behind Miller's music shop last year." More laughter rippled through the crowd. Marcus leaned forward, his perfect smile widening. "And you think you can play that rusty piece of junk in a real talent show? Sweetheart, this is Nashville, not some backyard barbecue." Sarah Cooper, Lily's mother, stood in the wings, her waitress uniform still smelling of coffee and grease from her double shift. Her fingers gripped the curtain so tight her knuckles turned white. But something flickered in Lily's dark eyes, something that made Marcus pause. It wasn't fear, it was fire. "My daddy played trumpet," Lily said, her voice stronger now. "He said music isn't about how shiny your instrument is. It's about what's in your heart." Marcus threw his head back and laughed. "Your daddy, huh? Where is he? Why isn't he here teaching you properly instead of letting you embarrass yourself with that garbage?" The theater went silent. Even the other judges shifted uncomfortably. "He died," Lily said simply, 2 years ago. "He never got to play professionally, but he taught me everything before he left. And I practice 6 hours every single day with this trumpet because it's all I have of his dream." The smile faded from Marcus's face, but only for a second. He stood up, his expensive shoes clicking on the stage as he walked toward her. The audience watched, transfixed. "Tell you what, little girl," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the silent theater. "How about we make this interesting? A real challenge. You and me, a trumpet duel. Right here, right now. If you can beat me, I'll pay for 5 years at the best music school in Nashville. Full scholarship. Everything you need." Gasps echoed through the crowd. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "But when you lose," Marcus continued, his smile returning, "you admit that dreams don't pay bills, and you stop wasting your time with that piece of junk. Deal?" Every eye in that theater turned to Lily. The little girl in the oversized dress, with the rusty trumpet and bare feet. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the moment. This was the kind of television gold that would trend for weeks. Lily looked down at her trumpet. She ran her small fingers over the dents, the tape, the spots where her daddy's hands had worn the metal smooth. Then she looked up at Marcus Sterling, and something in her expression made the celebrity judge take an involuntary step back. "Deal," Lily whispered, and she raised her trumpet to her lips. Marcus Sterling rolled his shoulders like a prize fighter entering the ring, a gesture calculated for the cameras. He lifted his gleaming trumpet, a custom Monet Prana worth $40,000, and the stage lights caught every curve of polished brass like it was made of liquid gold. The instrument alone cost more than Sarah Cooper made in 2 years of double shifts at the diner. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with that megawatt smile that had graced a dozen magazine covers, Let me show you what real music sounds like when you have the right training, the right instrument, and the right dedication." The pause was deliberate. The emphasis on right was a dagger aimed directly at the little girl standing in the shadows. Marcus positioned himself center stage, feet planted in the stance he'd perfected at Juilliard. He raised the trumpet to his lips, and the first note that emerged was nothing short of spectacular. It soared through the theater, perfect and powerful, hitting harmonics that made the crystal chandeliers tremble and sing in sympathy. He launched into Haydn's Trumpet Concerto in E-flat major, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. His fingers flew across the valves like hummingbird wings, executing runs and trills that most professional musicians wouldn't attempt without months of preparation. Triple-tonguing passages that sounded like machine gun fire. Leaps between registers that seemed to defy physics. The audience was mesmerized. People leaned forward in their seats, mouths open. This wasn't just good, this was world-class. This was why Marcus Sterling had 3 Grammy Awards by age 27. This was why his last album went double platinum. This was why he commanded $50,000 for a single private performance. He played for exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds. He timed it perfectly, ending on a stratospheric high note that seemed to pierce through the theater ceiling itself. He held it for a full 6 seconds, his face barely showing effort, before cutting it off with surgical precision. The applause was immediate and thunderous. People jumped to their feet like they'd been shocked by electricity. Women in the front rows screamed his name. The other judges were already nodding, making notes on their scorecards with expressions of impressed approval. Several audience members had their phones out, already uploading clips to social media with captions like "Marcus Sterling destroys at talent show." Marcus took a deep theatrical bow, once to the center, once to each side of the theater. He soaked in the adoration like a man who'd earned every second of it. When he finally straightened, his smile was radiant, his confidence absolute. He walked slowly back toward Lily, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking on the stage floor. Each step was deliberate, calculated. He stopped just close enough that his shadow fell across her. "Your turn, sweetheart," he said, his voice carrying just enough condescension to make it sting. The microphone picked up every word. "Good luck following that, though maybe you'd like to reconsider. There's no shame in admitting when you're outmatched." He paused, tilting his head with mock concern. "I mean, we wouldn't want you to embarrass yourself more than necessary. This is going to be on television after all. Thousands of people watching, maybe millions online." Lily stood frozen at the edge of the stage, her bare feet looking impossibly small against the polished wood. Her small hands trembled visibly around her battered trumpet. The tarnished metal seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, making it look even more pathetic next to Marcus's gleaming instrument. In the wings, Sarah pressed her fist against her mouth, fighting back tears. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to run out there, grab her daughter and flee this place. This had been a terrible mistake. What had she been thinking, letting Lily accept this challenge? Marcus returned to his judge's seat, crossing his legs confidently. He leaned toward the judge beside him, Dorothy Chen, a 72-year-old classical music professor from Vanderbilt with silver hair and fierce eyes. He whispered something behind his hand, and Sarah saw him gesture dismissively toward Lily. Dorothy's expression hardened, but she said nothing yet. The theater buzzed with conversation. People were already declaring Marcus the winner. A teenage boy in the balcony shouted, "Just give him the trophy!" Lily took one step forward, then another. Each movement looked like walking through quicksand. The spotlight seemed 10 times hotter now, and her oversized dress, a hand-me-down from the church donation box, clung to her with nervous sweat. "Whenever you're ready, honey," Dorothy Chen said gently, her voice cutting through the noise. It was the only kindness in the room, and Lily latched onto it like a lifeline. Lily closed her eyes. She thought about her daddy, Thomas Cooper, the factory worker who'd bought a second-hand trumpet with his tax return and taught himself to play by watching YouTube videos at midnight after everyone else was asleep. She thought about how he'd come home bone-tired every night, his hands stained with machine oil, but still practice for an hour on their apartment balcony before bed. She thought about the last thing he'd said to her before the accident at the plant, when she was only 6 years old. Music isn't about being perfect, baby girl. It's about making people feel something real. It's about truth, and truth is always beautiful, even when it hurts. Lily raised her rusty trumpet to her lips and began to play. The first note that came from Lily's trumpet wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't technically perfect like Marcus's performance. It wasn't loud or flashy. It didn't announce itself with power or precision, but something about it cut through the air like a knife through silk, raw, honest, and heartbreakingly pure. She played an old spiritual, "Sometimes I feel like a motherless child," but she played it differently than anyone in that theater had ever heard. She played it like someone who understood what those words actually meant, like someone who knew what it felt like to be alone in a world too big and too hard. Every note carried weight. Every phrase told a story. When she hit the low notes, you could feel loneliness settling into your bones. When she climbed to the higher register, you could hear hope fighting its way through layers of despair, struggling but refusing to die. Marcus's smirk began to fade. He sat up straighter in his chair, his casual confidence evaporating. His hands gripped the armrests. In the audience, a woman in the third row started crying. She didn't know why. She'd come to the talent show because her husband had free tickets. She didn't even particularly like trumpet music, but something about this little girl's playing reached into her chest and squeezed her heart until tears just came. An elderly man in the balcony closed his eyes, and suddenly he was 22 again, standing at his own father's grave, wishing he'd said all the things he'd never said. A middle-aged woman in row 7 thought about her daughter who died of leukemia 3 years ago. A teenage boy remembered his best friend who'd moved away and never called. Lily's playing did that. It opened doors in people's hearts that they'd kept locked for years. Sarah Cooper collapsed against the wall backstage, her whole body shaking with sobs. She was watching her husband play again. She could hear Thomas in every note, his gentleness, his strength, his refusal to let the world make him hard. Lily's technique wasn't perfect. Her breathing was audible between phrases. Sometimes her fingers didn't hit the valves quite cleanly, and you could hear the click of imperfect connections. The trumpet itself produced a slightly rough tone in the lower register, where the dents affected the vibration, but none of that mattered. None of it mattered at all, because Lily Cooper, 8 years old, barefoot in a dress from a church donation box, playing a trumpet held together with duct tape, was doing something that Marcus Sterling, with all his training at Juilliard, all his Grammys, all his technical perfection, had completely forgotten how to do. She was telling the truth. 2 minutes into her performance, the entire Grand Theatre sat in absolute silence. Even the people who'd been whispering stopped. Even the couple who'd been checking their phones put them away. Even Marcus Sterling had stopped moving entirely, frozen like a statue, his perfect features locked in an expression that might have been shock or recognition, or something far more complicated. Dorothy Chen, the classical professor who'd heard thousands of performances in her 5 decades of teaching, had tears streaming down her weathered face. She wasn't alone. At least 3 dozen people in the audience were openly weeping. Others sat with their hands pressed over their hearts, barely breathing. This wasn't a performance anymore. This was a prayer. This was grief and love and dreams, all poured through a battered trumpet, held together with hope and memory. When Lily hit the final note, a long, sustained tone that seemed to hang in the air like morning mist, nobody moved. The silence stretched for 5 seconds, then 10, then 15. Then someone in the back row, an elderly black woman with white hair, stood up slowly and began to clap. Her applause sounded like thunder in the silent theatre. Then another person stood, then another, then 10, then 50. Within 30 seconds, the entire theatre was on its feet, applauding so hard the walls seemed to shake. People weren't just clapping, they were cheering, shouting, some still crying. It was the kind of ovation usually reserved for once-in-a-lifetime performances. But Marcus Sterling remained seated, staring at that little girl with her rusty trumpet, his face pale as paper, his hands gripping his armrests so tight his knuckles had turned white. Backstage, while the audience still roared their approval in waves that seemed to have no end, Sarah held Lily so tight the little girl could barely breathe. The applause continued, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. People in the theatre didn't want to stop. They didn't want this moment to end. "Baby, where did you learn to play like that?" Sarah whispered into Lily's hair, her voice shaking. "Your daddy taught you the basics, but that was something else entirely. That was magic." Lily looked up at her mother with those dark, serious eyes that had always seemed too old for her small face. "I practice what Daddy showed me, every day. 6 hours, just like I promised him." "I know, sweetheart, but—" Sarah couldn't find the words. She'd heard Lily practice every day for 2 years, but this performance had been on a completely different level. "And I remember everything," Lily interrupted quietly, with the certainty of truth. "Everything he told me, every story about music, every lesson. He said music lives in the broken places. He said you have to play from where it hurts." Thomas Cooper had worked at the Madison Metal Works plant for 15 years before he died. He'd taken that job straight out of high school, 3 days after Sarah told him she was pregnant. He'd had a scholarship offer to Berklee College of Music, full ride, everything paid for, but he'd turned it down without a second thought. Sarah had begged him not to. He'd just smiled and said, "Music will wait. My family won't." For 15 years, he'd worked 12-hour shifts, operating machines that turned sheets of metal into car parts. His hands had been permanently stained with machine oil. His back had developed a permanent ache from standing on concrete floors. But he'd never complained, not once. Sarah remembered those nights. After those brutal shifts, her husband would sit on their apartment's tiny balcony, barely big enough for a chair, and play his trumpet. The neighbors in their rundown complex never complained. Instead, they'd open their windows to listen. Mrs. Henderson from apartment 3B said Thomas's music was better than any therapy she'd ever tried. Mr. Rodriguez from 5A said it helped him sleep. The teenage kids in 2C said it was the only beautiful thing in their neighborhood. "He told me music has to come from the hurt places," Lily continued, her small voice steady. "The places that are broken. He said that's where the truth lives. He said his trumpet was old and dented, but that's what made it special. All those dents were stories. All those scratches were memories. Perfect things don't have stories." Thomas had found that trumpet in a pawn shop on Dickerson Pike for $50. The owner, a sad-faced man with tattoos and tired eyes, said it had belonged to a session musician who'd fallen on hard times and needed quick cash for rent. Thomas bought it with money he'd been saving for new work boots, and he played it every single day for 14 years, until the night he didn't come home from the plant. The boiler explosion killed 3 men instantly. Thomas Cooper was one of them. 2 others died later in the hospital. The investigation found that management had ignored safety warnings about pressure valve malfunctions for 8 months to save money. The company paid fines and settlements. None of it brought anyone back. Thomas had been 31 years old. Lily had been 6. Sarah had wanted to throw the trumpet away after the funeral. She couldn't bear to look at it. Every time she saw that dented brass, she heard Thomas playing on the balcony, smelled the machine oil on his hands, felt his absence like a physical wound. She'd put it in a box marked for goodwill. But 6-year-old Lily had rescued it. She'd found it in the donation pile, pulled it out, and hidden it under her bed. Then she'd taught herself to play using Thomas's old instruction books from the library, the ones with his handwritten notes in the margins. She practiced while Sarah was at work. Practiced until her lips bled, practiced until her small arms ached. "I play for him," Lily said now, looking up at her mother with absolute conviction. "So his dream doesn't die completely. So something beautiful came from all those years in the factory. He gave up everything for us. The least I can do is keep his music alive." Sarah pulled her daughter close again, crying so hard she couldn't speak. Through the curtain, she could see Marcus Sterling standing now, arguing with Dorothy Chen. The classical professor was gesturing emphatically, her face flushed with anger. The third judge, Robert Williams, a music producer with silver hair and a reputation for discovering talent, stood between them, looking deeply uncomfortable. Marcus shook his head violently, his mouth moving in sharp, angry words that Sarah couldn't hear. His whole body radiated fury. Something was very, very wrong. "You absolutely cannot be serious," Marcus hissed at Dorothy Chen, keeping his voice low enough that the microphones wouldn't pick it up, but loud enough to convey his rage. His face had gone red. "This is a music competition, Dorothy. Not a charity case, not a feel-good story for social media." That child has more raw talent than I've seen in 30 years of teaching at Vanderbilt," Dorothy shot back, her voice trembling with anger. "And you know it. Everyone in this theater knows it. I've judged international competitions. I've heard professionals who couldn't do what she just did." The third judge, Robert Williams, cleared his throat uncomfortably. He'd been in the music industry for 40 years, produced albums for legends, and he knew when he was watching something special. "Marcus, son, you got to admit, that was something extraordinary. I've never seen an audience react like that. People were genuinely moved. That's what music is supposed to do." "She broke the rules," Marcus insisted, his perfect composure cracking like thin ice. A vein pulsed in his temple. "Look at that trumpet. It's not even properly maintained. It's trash. How do we know it's not damaged? How do we know she's actually playing it correctly and not just making noise that sounds emotional?" "Are you seriously suggesting—" Dorothy began, her voice rising dangerously. "I'm suggesting," Marcus interrupted, leaning forward with steel in his eyes, "that we need to be objective here, professional. Yes, she played emotionally. Yes, the audience liked it. Fine, but technically I hit every single note perfectly. I executed one of the most difficult pieces in the entire trumpet repertoire without a single mistake. That's what should matter in a music competition: skill, training, excellence, not some sob story about a dead dad." Robert shifted uncomfortably in his expensive suit. "He's got a point about the technical aspect, Dorothy. The kid was great, emotionally speaking, but Marcus's performance was technically flawless." "Technical!" Dorothy's voice rose slightly before she caught herself. "Music isn't just about technical perfection, Robert. It's about connection. It's about making people feel. It's about truth. What good is perfect technique if the music is empty, if it doesn't touch anyone?" "About ratings," Marcus cut in smoothly, switching tactics like a lawyer pivoting in court. His voice became reasonable, measured. "Think about it practically. This show needs a winner who can represent us professionally, someone polished, someone who can book real gigs and make the show look good, someone sponsors want to work with, not an 8-year-old with a rusty horn and a sad story who'll probably quit music in a year anyway." Dorothy stared at him like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "So that's what this is really about. Your ego. You can't stand that a child with no formal training, playing a trumpet held together with tape, completely outperformed you. You can't stand that she connected with people in a way you haven't been able to do in years. Something dangerous flashed in Marcus's eyes. I didn't get outperformed. I got outcried. There's a difference. She manipulated emotions. I demonstrated mastery. You demonstrated nothing but your own emptiness, Dorothy said coldly. In the wings, Lily watched them argue through a gap in the curtain. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see Marcus gesturing angrily, his face contorted with fury. She could see Dorothy shaking her head emphatically. She could see Robert looking between them like a man watching a car accident. Her stomach twisted into knots. Her hands felt cold despite the heat backstage. "What's happening, Mama?" she whispered. Sarah's face had gone hard, her jaw clenched. Her waitress instincts, honed from years of dealing with difficult customers, told her exactly what was happening. "That man is trying to weasel out of his promise, baby." Marcus stood up suddenly, smoothing his designer jacket. He grabbed his microphone with practiced ease, and when he turned to the audience, that $1,000,000 smile was back in place like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just been arguing about destroying a little girl's dream. "Folks, can I have your attention, please?" His voice boomed through the speakers, warm and professional. "My fellow judges and I need to have a serious discussion about the technical rules of this competition. We want to make sure we're being completely fair to both performers. We're going to take a 15-minute break to deliberate properly. Thank you so much for your patience and understanding." The audience murmured in confusion. Some people shouted objections. Most thought the decision was obvious, but Marcus's smile never wavered. He strode off stage, his expensive shoes clicking against the hardwood, but not before shooting Lily a look over his shoulder. It was a look that made her blood run cold. A look that said, "I'm going to destroy you, and there's nothing you can do about it." Sarah pulled Lily back from the curtain, but they both knew. Whatever happened next, Marcus Sterling wasn't going to go down without a fight. Dorothy Chen found Sarah Cooper in the green room 15 minutes later, holding Lily's hand while the little girl sat quietly, still clutching her trumpet. The older woman's face was flushed with anger, and her hands trembled slightly as she closed the door behind her. "Mrs. Cooper, I need to ask you something important," Dorothy said, sitting down heavily in a folding chair. "Your late husband, Thomas Cooper, did he ever mention where he learned to play trumpet? Who taught him?" Sarah frowned, confused by the question. "Self-taught, mostly. He watched videos online, borrowed books from the library. Why does this matter right now? Did he ever mention studying under anyone? Even informally, taking lessons from someone in person?" Well, Sarah thought back, reaching into memories she usually kept locked away. He did say something once, years ago, about taking some lessons when he was younger, before I knew him. From a street musician in Memphis, some man who played jazz on Beale Street and taught kids for free. But that man died, I think. Thomas was really torn up about it. Why does any of this matter? Dorothy pulled out her phone and scrolled through old photographs she'd saved in a folder labeled Music History. She stopped on one particular image and turned the screen towards Sarah. "Is this your husband?" The photo showed a young Thomas Cooper, maybe 19 or 20, his face unlined and hopeful, standing beside an older black man with grey in his beard and a trumpet in his hands. Both were smiling, standing on a street corner with a guitar case open for tips. The image was dated 2008. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Yes, that's Thomas. He was so young there. How do you have this picture?" "Because that older man standing next to him is James Sterling," Dorothy said quietly, watching Sarah's face carefully. "Marcus Sterling's father." The room went absolutely silent. Even the muffled sounds from the theatre seemed to fade away. James Sterling was one of the greatest jazz trumpeters of his generation, Dorothy continued, her voice heavy with old sadness. He should have been famous, should have had the career Marcus has now. But he refused to compromise his art for commercial success. Record labels wanted him to play pop music, to water down his jazz, to be more marketable. He told them all to go to hell. Sarah's hand had flown to her mouth. Her eyes were wide with shock. James spent his last 15 years teaching kids on the streets of Memphis for free, Dorothy went on. Kids who couldn't afford real lessons, kids from broken homes, kids who needed music to survive. He'd stand on Beale Street from noon until sunset, teaching anyone who wanted to learn. He died about 10 years ago, heart attack. He was only 63. Thomas talked about a teacher named James, Sarah whispered, memories flooding back. He said the man changed his entire life, taught him that music wasn't about being the best or the most famous. It was about being honest, about truth, about not letting the world make you play someone else's song. But Thomas never mentioned, he never said the man's last name. I had no idea. Marcus doesn't talk about his father, Dorothy said, and there was deep pain in her voice. They had a terrible falling out when Marcus was 20. James had wanted his son to pursue jazz, to carry on his legacy of honest music. But Marcus signed with a major label, started playing commercial country pop fusion, whatever sold. James called his son a sellout on live radio, called him a traitor to real music. They never spoke again. James died still angry at his son. Marcus has spent 7 years trying to prove his father wrong. Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes, and with it came a cold fury. And when Lily played tonight, she played exactly like James Sterling used to play, Dorothy finished. Raw, honest, unpolished but real, from the soul. Your husband must have passed those exact teachings down to her. I recognized the style immediately. I studied under James briefly in graduate school. Marcus recognized it too. He heard his father's philosophy coming from that little girl's trumpet, and he can't stand it. Lily had been listening silently, her dark eyes moving between the adults. Now she spoke up, her voice small but clear. Is that why he's so mad at me? Because I play like his daddy taught mine. Dorothy knelt down to Lily's level, taking the little girl's hands in her weathered ones. Sweetheart, you play the way music is supposed to be played, the way it's meant to touch hearts. And that scares Marcus, because deep down, in a place he doesn't want to look at, he knows he lost that ability when he started caring more about being famous than being honest. You remind him of everything he gave up, everything his father wanted him to be. But I just wanted to play for my daddy, Lily whispered. I know, baby, Dorothy said gently, and you did. You honored him beautifully. A door slammed open hard enough to make all 3 of them jump. Marcus Sterling stood in the doorway, his face a mask of controlled fury. His perfect hair was slightly disheveled now, and his eyes burned with something that looked almost like desperation. We're ready to announce the results, he said coldly, each word sharp as broken glass. Everyone back on stage, right now. He turned and walked away, leaving the door swinging behind him. Through it, they could hear the audience growing restless, wondering what was taking so long. Dorothy stood slowly, her expression hardened with determination. Whatever happens out there, she said to Sarah and Lily, know that some of us see the truth, some of us know real music when we hear it. But as they walked toward the stage, Sarah noticed that Marcus was standing with Robert Williams, speaking in low, urgent tones, and Robert was nodding, his expression troubled but resigned. The fix, Sarah realized with sinking dread, was already in. The stage lights felt like interrogation lamps as Marcus Sterling stood at the microphone, his smile perfectly practiced. The audience had returned from the break, buzzing with speculation, most of them certain Lily had won. They were about to learn otherwise. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience, Marcus began, his voice smooth as honey. My fellow judges and I have had a lengthy discussion about tonight's performances. Both were exceptional in their own ways. Dorothy Chen sat rigid in her judge's chair, her lips pressed into a thin line. She'd argued for 40 minutes backstage. She'd threatened to quit. Robert Williams had ultimately sided with Marcus, citing technical standards and professional considerations, 2 votes to 1. After careful deliberation, Marcus continued, we've determined that we have a technical tie. The audience erupted in confused murmurs. Several people shouted objections. A man in the balcony yelled, "That's garbage." Marcus raised his hand for silence, never losing his composure. I understand your reaction, but as judges, we must consider more than just emotional response. We must evaluate technical proficiency, note accuracy, breath control, and adherence to musical standards. This is a travesty, Dorothy said into her microphone, not bothering to hide her disgust. That child moved every person in this theater. That's what music is supposed to do. Which is why, Marcus cut in smoothly, we're not declaring a winner yet. Instead, we're invoking Rule 7 of the competition bylaws. In the event of a tie, contestants will perform a second piece, chosen by the judges to test specific technical skills. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Lily gripped her mother's hand so tight it hurt. The second round will take place in 1 week, Marcus announced. Same stage, same stakes. But this time, I'll be selecting a piece from the classical trumpet repertoire, something that will truly test technical ability. The piece will be announced in 3 days, giving both of us time to prepare. The audience exploded with protests. People were standing, shouting. This wasn't what they'd come to see. This wasn't fair. But Marcus simply smiled and nodded to security, who began ushering people toward the exits. Dorothy stormed off stage without another word. Robert looked uncomfortable, but remained seated, avoiding eye contact with everyone. As the theater emptied, Marcus approached Lily and Sarah. Up close, his eyes were cold despite his smile. I hope you're ready for a real competition, little girl. No more emotional manipulation, no more sympathy votes, just pure skill, and we both know you don't have the training for what I'm going to throw at you. Sarah stepped between them. You're terrified of her. That's what this is about. Marcus laughed, but it sounded hollow. Terrified. Of a child with a garbage trumpet? No. I'm just ensuring that this competition maintains its integrity. See you in a week. He walked away, leaving them standing alone on the empty stage. Lily looked up at her mother, and for the first time, Sarah saw real fear in her daughter's eyes. Mama, I don't know if I can do this, Lily whispered. What if he picks something I don't know? What if I can't learn it in time? Sarah knelt down, cupping her daughter's face. Then we practice every single hour we can. Your daddy didn't give up when things got hard, and neither will you. But even as she said the words, Sarah wondered if love and determination would be enough against someone who was willing to cheat to win. 3 days later, the announcement came via social media. Marcus Sterling posted a video, his smile sharp as knives. The piece for round 2 will be Carnival of Venice, with full variations. One of the most technically demanding pieces ever written for trumpet. May the best musician win. When Sarah looked up the piece on YouTube, her heart sank. Professional trumpeters trained for months to master it. Some never could. It required double-tonguing, triple-tonguing, rapid valve work, and extreme range, techniques far beyond what Thomas had taught Lily. Marcus had chosen the one piece he knew she couldn't possibly learn in 4 days. Dorothy Chen arrived at Sarah's apartment the next morning, carrying a trumpet case and a determined expression. She'd found their address through the competition registration forms, technically a violation of privacy rules, but she didn't care anymore. "May I come in?" she asked when Sarah opened the door, surprise written across her face. The apartment was tiny, a living room barely big enough for a couch and TV, a kitchenette with outdated appliances, 2 small bedrooms. But it was clean, and photographs of Thomas covered every available surface. Him holding baby Lily. Him on the balcony with his trumpet. Him smiling at the camera with machine oil-stained hands and tired, happy eyes. "I'm here to help," Dorothy said simply. "What Marcus is doing is wrong, unethical, and I won't stand by and watch him destroy a child's dream because he can't face his own demons." Lily sat on the couch, her trumpet in her lap, looking smaller than ever. "I've been practicing the piece," she said quietly. "I watched videos, but I don't understand some of the techniques. My fingers can't move that fast yet." Dorothy sat beside her, opening her case to reveal a beautiful silver trumpet, not as expensive as Marcus's, but professional quality. "I'm going to teach you everything I can in 4 days. It won't be easy. You might not master it completely, but you'll learn enough to show that pompous fool that talent isn't just about expensive instruments and fancy schools." For the next 4 days, Dorothy came every morning and stayed until evening. She taught Lily proper breathing techniques, how to double tongue, how to navigate the fastest passages. She broke down Carnival of Venice into manageable sections, focusing on the most impressive variations. Sarah worked the night shift at the diner so she could be home during the day, sleeping only 3 hours between shifts. She sat in the corner watching her daughter practice until her lips bled, until her small arms trembled with exhaustion, until tears ran down her face. But Lily never quit. On the 3rd evening, Dorothy told them something she'd been holding back. "I did some research into James Sterling's life. After his falling out with Marcus, James wrote several articles about the commercialization of music, about how the industry crushes soul in favor of profit. He named Marcus specifically in one article, said his son had traded his father's legacy for fool's gold." "That's harsh," Sarah murmured. "It destroyed Marcus," Dorothy continued. "He was 20 years old, just starting his career. That article followed him everywhere. Critics referenced it. Other musicians whispered about it. He spent years trying to prove his father wrong, becoming more and more commercially successful, more and more technically perfect. But the one thing he could never do was make people feel what his father could make them feel. And Lily can, Sarah realized. Lily plays like James did, like Thomas did, from the broken places. That's why Marcus is so threatened. She's living proof that his father was right, that all of Marcus's success, all his technical mastery, can't compare to honest music played from the heart. Lily had stopped practicing and was listening. "His daddy must have been really sad," she said softly, "to be so mad at his son that he never forgave him." Dorothy nodded. "James died angry. And Marcus has lived every day since trying to justify his choices. Your music forces him to confront the fact that maybe he made the wrong ones." On the 4th day, Lily could play most of Carnival of Venice. Not perfectly, her technique still wavered in the fastest sections, and she couldn't hit every high note with Marcus's precision. But she could play it well enough to compete. More importantly, she'd figured out how to play it with emotion. She'd found the joy hidden in the technical passages. She'd discovered that even this showpiece could tell a story if you let it. The night before the competition, Sarah held Lily close. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you." "Your daddy would be so proud." "I wish he could be there," Lily whispered. "He will be, baby. He's always with you when you play." But neither of them could sleep that night, wondering what Marcus Sterling had planned for the morning. The Grand Theatre was packed even fuller than before. Word had spread on social media about the showdown, the celebrity judge versus the underdog child. News crews filled the back rows. The story had gone viral. Everyone wanted to see how it ended. Marcus Sterling arrived in a limousine, wearing a designer suit that cost more than Sarah's car. He waved to the cameras, signed autographs, posed for selfies. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man who knew he'd already won. Lily arrived in Sarah's 15-year-old Honda, wearing the same oversized dress, carrying the same rusty trumpet. But this time, Dorothy Chen walked beside them, her hand on Lily's shoulder like a protective guardian. Backstage, Marcus practiced scales with mechanical precision. His warm-up routine was perfect, calculated, designed for maximum efficiency. He didn't look nervous. He looked bored. Lily's warm-up was different. She played softly, hesitantly, her small fingers still learning the muscle memory Dorothy had taught her. Her lips were still healing from 4 days of intensive practice. "You ready?" Dorothy asked gently. Lily shook her head. "I'm scared." "Good," Dorothy said. "Your father was probably scared before every performance too. Fear means you care. Marcus isn't scared anymore, and that's his weakness." And the judges took their seats. Dorothy, Robert Williams, and a new third judge since Marcus was competing. The replacement was Gerald Foster, a Broadway musical director with kind eyes and grey hair. He'd agreed to judge on 1 day's notice. Marcus performed first this time. He stepped onto that stage like he owned it, his $40,000 trumpet gleaming under the lights. When he began playing Carnival of Venice, the audience gasped at the sheer technical virtuosity. His fingers flew across the valves faster than seemed humanly possible. Every note was crystal clear. Every variation was executed with machine-like precision. He hit high notes that made the chandeliers ring. He played passages that made professional musicians in the audience shake their heads in amazement. It was a perfect performance, technically flawless, a masterclass in trumpet playing that would be studied and analyzed for years. When he finished, the applause was loud and respectful. People recognized they'd witnessed something extraordinary, but something was missing. The standing ovation from the first night didn't happen. People clapped politely, impressed, but not moved. Marcus noticed. His smile faltered for just a second before he recovered. Then it was Lily's turn. She walked to center stage, and the audience could see her trembling. Her hands shook. Her bare feet looked so small against the polished wood. When she raised her trumpet, several people in the front rows could see tears in her eyes. She started playing, and immediately it was clear she was struggling. The opening passage was slower than Marcus's version. Her fingers stumbled on the fast runs. She missed a high note in the second variation, and the sound came out cracked and wrong. People in the audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the magical performance from a week ago. This was a child struggling with material beyond her skill level. Some audience members looked angry at Marcus for putting her through this, angry at the system that allowed it. Marcus sat in the audience, his expression neutral, but his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. He'd won. Even he could see it. The little girl couldn't handle the technical demands. His victory was assured. But then something changed. Lily closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and something in her posture shifted. She stopped trying to play it perfectly. She stopped worrying about matching Marcus's technique. Instead, she started playing it true. The transformation was immediate and stunning. Lily stopped fighting the music and started dancing with it. Yes, her technique was imperfect. Yes, she missed notes. But suddenly none of that mattered, because she was telling a story with every phrase. She played Carnival of Venice, not as a technical showpiece, but as what it was meant to be. A celebration, a festival, joy despite hardship, laughter through tears. She found the humanity buried under all those fast notes and made it sing. The audience began to lean forward again. The discomfort shifted to engagement. People weren't watching a competition anymore. They were watching something real unfold before their eyes. Then in the middle of the third variation, an elderly black woman stood up from her seat in the 5th row. She was the same woman who had started the standing ovation at the first performance. Her voice rang out clear and strong. "Stop this!" Lily's playing faltered. The theatre went silent. Every head turned toward the woman. Security moved to escort her out, but she raised her hand with such authority that they paused. "My name is Ruth Sterling," she announced. James Sterling was my brother, and I have something to say. Dorothy Chen gasped audibly. Marcus went white as a sheet. Ruth Sterling walked down the aisle toward the stage, her cane tapping with each step. She was at least 75, her white hair pinned back, wearing a purple church dress and sensible shoes, but her eyes burned with righteous fury. I have sat here for 2 weeks watching my nephew Marcus Sterling bully a child because he's too much of a coward to face his own failings, she declared, her voice carrying to every corner of the theater. That little girl plays exactly like my brother James taught his students to play, with truth, with heart, with soul. And it terrifies Marcus because it reminds him of everything he betrayed. Aunt Ruth, please! Marcus stood up, his composure completely shattered. Don't you Aunt Ruth me, boy, she snapped. I was there when you told your father his music was worthless because it didn't sell. I was there when you said he was a failure because he chose art over money. I held my brother's hand when he died, and you know what his last words were? Tell Marcus I forgive him. Tell him it's not too late to come home to real music. The theater was so silent you could hear breathing. Cameras were recording everything. This was going to be everywhere by morning. Tears were streaming down Marcus's face now, his perfect facade completely destroyed. He never forgave me. He died hating me. He died loving you, you fool. Ruth's voice cracked with emotion. He died hoping you'd remember what he taught you. And instead, you've spent 7 years trying to prove him wrong by becoming everything he warned you against. She turned to Lily, who stood frozen on stage, her trumpet still raised. That little girl's father learned from James. I saw the photo Dorothy found. I remember Thomas Cooper, sweet boy, worked so hard, loved music with his whole heart. James talked about him for months after Thomas had to quit lessons, said that boy had the gift, said he'd make something beautiful even if the world tried to stop him. Ruth looked back at Marcus. And Thomas did make something beautiful. He made her. She pointed at Lily. He passed on James's teachings to his daughter before he died. Your father's legacy is alive in that child's playing, and you can't stand it because it proves that you're the one who failed, not him. Marcus collapsed back into his seat, his hands covering his face. His shoulders shook with sobs. The mighty Marcus Sterling, Grammy winner, celebrity judge, brought to his knees by the truth he'd been running from for 7 years. The audience didn't know what to do. Some people were crying. Others sat in stunned silence. This had stopped being a competition. This had become something else entirely, a public reckoning. Gerald Foster, the replacement judge, spoke into his microphone, his voice gentle. I think we need to take another break. This has become something beyond a talent competition. But Ruth Sterling shook her head. No, let the girl finish playing. Let her complete what she started. Stop letting fear and pride interrupt beauty. She looked up at Lily with such kindness that the little girl's tears finally spilled over. Play, child. Finish your song. Show us what my brother's teachings became in your hands. Lily stood at center stage, her trumpet still raised, tears streaming down her small face. The theater waited in breathless silence. Marcus Sterling sat collapsed in the audience, broken. His Aunt Ruth remained standing in the aisle, her cane planted firmly, her expression both fierce and loving. For a long moment, Lily didn't move. She could walk away right now. She could claim victory through revelation rather than performance. Marcus was destroyed. The truth was out. She'd already won in every way that mattered. But then she thought about her father, Thomas Cooper, who never gave up even when the world told him his dreams were worthless, who played his trumpet on that tiny balcony every night after 12-hour shifts, not because anyone was listening, not because it would make him famous, but because it was true. She thought about James Sterling, a man she'd never met, but whose teachings lived in every note she played. A man who chose art over fortune, truth over success, and paid the price for that choice every day of his life. And she thought about Marcus, broken, sobbing Marcus, who had everything she dreamed of having but had lost the one thing that mattered most. Lily lowered her trumpet slowly. The audience tensed, thinking she was giving up. But instead, she spoke into the microphone, her small voice amplified through the theatre. "Mr. Sterling taught my daddy a song," she said quietly. "James Sterling, I mean. My daddy used to play it on the balcony. He said it was called Memphis Morning. He said Mr. Sterling wrote it for his son, hoping Marcus would play it one day. But Daddy said Marcus never learned it." Marcus's head snapped up, his tear-stained face stricken with recognition and pain. "My daddy taught it to me before he died," Lily continued. "He said it was the most beautiful song he'd ever heard. He said it was about loving someone even when they break your heart. About keeping the door open even when they don't come home." She raised her trumpet again. "I'm going to play it now, not for the competition, not to win, just because Mr. Sterling's song should be played. And because maybe Marcus never got to hear his daddy tell him, 'I love you' with music." Ruth Sterling's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, sweet child," she whispered. Dorothy Chen was openly weeping. Even Gerald Foster had tears in his eyes. Lily closed her eyes and began to play Memphis Morning. The melody was simple at first, just a gentle sunrise kind of sound, but it grew more complex, more emotional. It was a conversation between father and son, spoken in notes instead of words. It asked questions. Why did you leave? Where did you go? It offered answers. I'm still here. I'm waiting. I forgive you. The song built to a crescendo that wasn't loud but was powerful. A musical embrace, a reconciliation that had never happened in life but could happen now, in music, if someone was brave enough to listen. Marcus Sterling stood slowly, swaying slightly, his face a mask of devastation and wonder. He was hearing his father's voice for the first time in 7 years, hearing the love he'd convinced himself didn't exist, hearing forgiveness he'd never thought he'd receive. When Lily played the final phrase, a gentle, descending line that sounded like, "Come home," Marcus made a sound that was half sob, half prayer. He walked down the aisle like a man in a dream, moving toward the stage where this little girl was giving him the greatest gift anyone had ever given him. He stopped at the stage's edge and looked up at Lily, this 8-year-old child who had somehow become the bridge between him and his father's memory. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice broken. "Thank you for giving me back something I thought I'd lost forever." Lily lowered her trumpet and looked at him with those serious, dark eyes. "Your daddy loved you," she said simply. "My daddy told me. Mr. Sterling talked about you all the time. He was sad you weren't talking, but he never stopped loving you." Marcus collapsed to his knees right there, in front of hundreds of people, cameras recording everything, and wept like a child. Not the polite tears of someone trying to maintain dignity, but the ugly, desperate crying of someone who'd been holding back an ocean of grief for 7 years. Ruth Sterling walked to her nephew and placed her hand on his shoulder. "James would be proud of this girl," she said softly. "He'd say she's what real music is supposed to create. Connection, healing, truth." The audience remained silent, witnessing something sacred. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was transformation. Finally, Gerald Foster spoke into his microphone, his voice thick with emotion. I think we need to reconvene in private. This competition has become something that can't be judged by traditional standards." But Marcus stood, wiping his eyes, and walked to the judges' table. He picked up his microphone with shaking hands. "No," he said hoarsely. "No more delays, no more manipulation. I'm withdrawing from the competition. Lily Cooper wins. She's always won. From the first note she played, she won." The audience erupted, cheering, crying, standing. But Marcus wasn't done. "And I'm making good on my original promise," he continued, his voice growing stronger. 5 years at the best music school in Nashville, full scholarship, everything she needs, plus. He paused, seeming to make a decision in real time. Plus, every child in this city who can't afford music lessons will get free instruction. I'm creating a foundation in my father's name, the James Sterling Foundation for Young Musicians. Starting today. The applause became thunderous, but Lily just stood there looking at Marcus with something like compassion in her young face. "You should learn to play Memphis Morning," she said quietly, but the microphone caught it. "Your daddy wanted you to know it. It's never too late." Marcus smiled through his tears, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him in years. "Will you teach me?" And Lily, this 8-year-old girl with a rusty trumpet and her father's dream in her heart, nodded. "Okay," she said, "but you have to practice 6 hours a day. That's the rule." 6 months later, the James Sterling Foundation for Young Musicians opened its doors in a renovated warehouse in East Nashville. The building had once been part of the Madison Metal Works plant, the same factory where Thomas Cooper had died. Marcus had bought it specifically for that reason, transforming a place of tragedy into a place of hope. On opening day, 200 children showed up with instruments in various states of repair. Some had shiny new trumpets bought by proud parents. Others carried guitars held together with duct tape, violins missing strings, drums with torn heads. It didn't matter. They all got the same welcome, the same instruction, the same chance. Marcus Sterling stood at the entrance, greeting each child personally. He looked different now. The designer suits were gone, replaced by jeans and a simple shirt. His hair was less perfect, but his smile was real in a way it hadn't been in 7 years. "Welcome," he said to a shy boy holding a battered saxophone. "Let me show you your practice room." Inside, the walls were covered with photographs. James Sterling playing on Beale Street, surrounded by kids. Thomas Cooper on his apartment balcony, trumpet raised to the Memphis sky. And in the center, one photo that had become famous around the world. 8-year-old Lily Cooper on stage at the Grand Theater, her rusty trumpet gleaming under the lights, tears on her face, playing Memphis Morning. That photo had gone viral within hours of the competition. News outlets worldwide had covered the story. "Child with trash, trumpet teaches Grammy winner about real music," one headline read. "The performance that changed everything," said another. But the real story was happening here, in this building, every day. Dorothy Chen had retired from Vanderbilt to run the foundation's educational programs. Ruth Sterling managed the administrative side, her cane tapping through the halls as she made sure every child got what they needed. And Sarah Cooper worked part-time in the office, finally able to quit her double shifts at the diner. Lily attended the Nashville School of Music on Marcus's scholarship, but she spent every afternoon at the foundation, teaching younger children the way her father had taught her. Not just technique, but truth. Not just notes, but stories. "Remember," she'd tell the kids, "your instrument doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be honest." The foundation had already changed hundreds of lives. A girl from a homeless shelter discovered she had perfect pitch and was now training for opera. A boy who'd been in and out of juvenile detention found peace in classical guitar and hadn't been in trouble since. Twin sisters from a trailer park formed a jazz duo that was already booking paid gigs. But the most remarkable transformation was Marcus himself. He'd taken a year off from touring to learn from Dorothy, to study his father's old recordings, to remember why he'd fallen in love with music in the first place. He practiced Memphis Morning every single day, exactly as Lily taught him. And slowly, painfully, he was finding his way back to the musician his father had wanted him to be. On this opening day, as the sun set over Nashville, Marcus stood on a small stage in the foundation's main hall. The children gathered around him, instruments in hand. Parents stood in the back. News cameras recorded for the local stations. "Before we begin today's celebration," Marcus said into the microphone, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom, "I want to tell you about my father, James Sterling, and about a man named Thomas Cooper, and about what they taught us about music and life and truth." He told the whole story, his falling out with his father, his years of chasing fame and fortune while losing his soul, Thomas learning from James on the streets of Memphis, the lessons passing from James to Thomas to Lily, the competition that became a reckoning, the song that changed everything. "I spent 7 years trying to prove my father wrong," Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. "Trying to show him that success mattered more than integrity, that fame was worth more than truth. I won Grammys. I sold millions of albums. I became everything the industry said I should be." He paused, looking around at all those young faces watching him with rapt attention, and I was miserable, because deep down, I knew he was right. Music isn't about how many awards you win. It's not about how much money you make. It's not about having the most expensive instrument or the fanciest technique. He picked up his trumpet, not the $40,000 Monet anymore, but a vintage horn he'd found in a pawn shop. It was dented, tarnished, and beautiful. Music is about connection. It's about making people feel something real. It's about truth, even when truth is painful, especially when truth is painful. Marcus looked at Lily, who stood in the front row with her mother. "An 8-year-old girl with a rusty trumpet taught me that. She taught me what my father tried to tell me years ago, that broken things can make the most beautiful music, that imperfection is where the truth lives, that the dents and scratches and worn places, those are the stories worth telling." He raised his trumpet. "So tonight I'm going to play something I should have learned years ago, a song my father wrote for me, a song that a brave little girl gave back to me when I didn't deserve it." Marcus began to play Memphis Morning. He didn't play it perfectly. His technique was still finding its way back. He missed a note in the second phrase, and you could hear his breath between sections. But he played it honestly. He played it with all the grief and love and regret and hope that had been building in his heart for 7 years. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the building. Children were crying, parents were crying. Ruth Sterling held Dorothy Chen's hand and wept for her brother, finally able to let go of years of anger and sadness. But the biggest surprise came when Marcus lowered his trumpet and looked directly at the cameras. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice steady now. "Something I discovered when I was going through my father's belongings to create this foundation. Something that changes everything." He pulled out an old yellowed envelope. "This is a letter my father wrote to me 3 days before he died. His lawyer gave it to me last month with instructions that it only be opened when Marcus was ready to hear it. I guess I'm finally ready." He opened it with shaking hands and read aloud, "Marcus, if you're reading this, it means you've found your way back to real music. I knew you would. You have too much of your mother's heart to stay lost forever. I was never angry at you, son. I was scared for you, scared you'd waste your gift chasing the wrong things. But I always knew you'd come home eventually. I love you. I'm proud of you. And when you're ready, learn to play Memphis Morning. I wrote it the day you were born. It's your song. It's always been your song. Come home, Marcus. Come home to the music that matters. Your father, James Sterling." The revelation hit like thunder. The song wasn't a plea for reconciliation. It was a birthday gift, a lullaby written for a newborn son, a love letter that had waited 27 years to be opened. Marcus collapsed onto a chair, sobbing openly. Lily walked to him and put her small hand on his shoulder. "He forgave you before you even needed forgiving," she said softly. "That's what daddies do." Ruth Sterling stood and addressed the cameras. Let this be a lesson to all of us. We waste so much time in anger and pride. We wait for perfect moments that never come, but music, true music, teaches us that broken things can be beautiful, that it's never too late to come home, that love doesn't wait for us to be perfect. The Foundation's opening celebration continued long into the night. Children played their instruments, some well, some poorly, all honestly. Marcus played alongside them, no longer the star, but just another musician trying to tell the truth. And Lily Cooper, the 8-year-old girl who'd started this journey with a rusty trumpet and her father's dream, played "Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child" one more time, but this time she wasn't alone. Dozens of children joined in, their imperfect instruments creating a symphony of hope. Sarah watched her daughter and thought about Thomas, about how his sacrifice had created ripples that touched hundreds of lives, about how his dream hadn't died, it had multiplied. As the final notes faded into the Nashville night, Marcus approached Lily one last time. "Thank you," he said simply, "for teaching me what my father tried to teach me all along." Lily smiled, that serious little smile that made her look wise beyond her years. "That's what music does," she said. "It teaches us how to be human again." And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when their work on earth is done, James Sterling and Thomas Cooper smiled, knowing that their legacy lived on in the hands of children who would never forget. Real music comes from truth, and truth comes from the broken places that dare to make beauty anyway.